everyone. I'm Maddie Margarita, Vice President of Sisters in Crime Orange County. Sisters in Crime is an organization dedicated to promoting the professional development and advancement of women crime writers and for equality in the industry. And if you love reading and or writing mystery, I hope you'll check us out and consider joining. Today, I'd like to welcome everyone to Appropriation versus Appreciation, writing about race, nationality, and gender. An important conversation hosted by Sisters in Crime Orange County in conjunction with the Pen on Fire speaker series. We're going to ask that everyone please stay muted during our discussion. And if you have questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the chat. Also, if you'd like to post where you're from in the chat, that's welcome also, so we know who's here and where we are. I'd like to welcome our panel today. We have Yasmin Angoe, a first-generation Ghanaian American and debut author of the bestseller and editor's pick, Her Name is Night. Yasmin is an award recipient of the Sisters in Crime Eleanor Taylor Bland Award for Emerging Writers of Color and a middle and high school English teacher who currently works as a developmental editor and sensitivity reader. Also with us today is Shannon Luders-Manuel, a writer, editor, and sensitivity reader with essays in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and Real Simple magazine, among others. Shannon has provided sensitivity reading services for major publishers, channeling her unique outlook as a mixed individual, which she refers to as her superpower. Also with us is Gary Phillips. Gary has been with us many times before. Gary has published various novels, comics, short stories, and edited several anthologies, including Orange County Noir and 44 Caliber Funk. Violent Spring, first published in 1994, was recently named one of the essential crime novels of Los Angeles. A staff writer on FX's Snowfall, about crack and the CIA in the 1980s in South Central, where he grew up. His upcoming novel, One Shot Harry, is set in a changing 1963 Los Angeles. Moderating our illustrious panel today is our president, Barbara DeMarco-Barrett. I want to get the whole name in there, Barbara. Barbara's first book, Pen on Fire, was a Los Angeles Times bestseller. She is the editor of and contributor to Palm Springs Noir, an anthology of short stories, and her writing has appeared in USA Noir, Best of the Akashic Noir series, Inlandia, Antarctica. Well, you are all over the place, Barbara. Journal Rock in a Hard Place, Crossing Borders, Poets and Writers, and the Dark City Crime and Mystery magazine. She's also the host of the podcast Writers on Writing. So now my duties are over. I'm going to turn the panel over to our moderator, Barbara DeMarco-Barrett.
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, I want to just say a few words about why I wanted to do this panel to begin with. And thank you, all of you, for being here, and especially to our panelists, because it's an important conversation. And at least in my classes and with writers I know, there's a lot of confusion over what they can write or not write, say or not say. People are confused, and everyone's afraid of making mistakes or being attacked or being canceled. And this just comes up so many times, and people are walking on eggshells. You know, words on the page are not open to interpretation exactly, not like artwork or music or the word is the word. And so, and we don't have language for so much that we don't understand or can't verbalize. So I wondered if we could begin with the three of you defining appropriation as opposed to appreciation. You know, like, where is the line? Anybody jump in? Yasmin.
How did I know you were going to call my name? Okay. I was trying to think about that because, you know, that is a little bit of a hard one to me, but I think appropriation versus appreciation to me would be like mentioning, talking about, bringing up experiences that are not your own without really delving into that and fleshing it out. Readers can tell, especially readers from those experiences can tell, like if someone is just, you know, dropping something in to like check off a box or something like that. So if you just mention something, but you really, there's no like, to me, if you mention something and there's no like depth to it, there's not a real reason why it's in there. It's just in there for, you know, for whatever reason, like readers can tell that. And so to me, that would become appropriation, because you're talking about something, but not really kind of getting into, you know, the importance of it and why you felt it is important to include in this particular story. So that's what I think.
Okay. Shannon, what do you think?
Hi, so first I want to say that I understand, you know, why people are afraid to say things, walking on eggshells. And I think part of the problem is that there is no like firm rule book, you know. Different people have different opinions, and that's why it's always important just to be in communication with others, because it's not black and white, you know, but just being cognizant, being listening, taking things in. I think that's the most important thing. And I would say one of the big differences between appreciation and appropriation is fetishizing. So if you're putting in like either a male or a female character and their role there is a black character and their role there, or any, you know, non-white character, and their role there is just to scintillate or like, you know, make the action more like daring or whatever. I think that's like a good definition, but or a good distinction between the two, where obviously you don't want to be putting something in just to make it more scintillating. So you want to like flesh out these characters and make them valuable to the story in their own right.
Okay. Gary, what do you think?
Well, certainly I agree with what both Shannon and Yasmin have said. And I mean, I guess to sort of get a little, or take, I suppose, my perspective on that, you know, I realized early on, well, I shouldn't say I realized, but, you know, one of my first novels, Violent Spring, you know, the main character is black, but then it's set in the aftermath of the 92, the events of 92. And so it, you know, talks about Korean black relations. The main character, his girlfriend is Japanese American. And so, you know, it's funny because funny writing it then, right? I mean, obviously I knew I was dealing with different folks of different races, different ethnicities, different experiences, but I didn't feel too wary. I think partly because I was young and I just had like a lot of energy. And because I know Japanese American friends, and I've been a community organizer, so I always had some familiarity with various areas of the city. So I felt certain comfort to do that. But I agree that, you know, as time progresses and now as you write different kinds of stories, you really should be clear. I mean, even myself, I mean, I grew up in South Central, so the area where I grew up, you know, now is heavily Latino. And so writing about the area now, I have to relearn things that certainly are going to be much different, you know, than when I was a kid or a teenager or a young man there, and knowing that, I guess that's right. And that you're right, that you do have to then talk to folks. I mean, the best thing to me is always hanging out someplace and just hearing people and whatever, and obviously just getting to know folks, so that you're right. I mean, if you put these people on the page, well, right, they can't just be there to be the exotic, to be the other, because they are individuals, and therefore you have to make them work in the context of the story like you make any other character work in the context of the story you're telling.
So it's, you know, if you say, you know, respect your characters, that's really not enough. Is that correct? I mean, you have to kind of go deeper than that, I suppose.
I think it's a start for sure, an important start. is to respect your characters. And then I think that the particular ways in which you respect your character, like the respect, I feel like is the foundation.
Mhm.
And then you build from that, you know.
Well, I just to not to throw a grenade from the sidelines, but just to put it out there, because it does come up. If you're writing a story, and let's say you have a antagonist who's of a different race, how do you handle that?
Mhm.
How do you navigate, portraying that character, understanding that there are times when if you do that, you're front loading certain perceptions, certain prejudices that your readers might already have about a given race or gender, and how do and are you just playing into that stereotype, or are you really working to give that dimension? And then of course you have to answer the question of why did I make that character who I made them?
How do you handle that?
I hopefully I'm not tone deaf. But I am. But even in my advanced years, I think I have learned a thing or two. And by the way, it really certainly does help when you read obviously other people's work, when you bring that into your consciousness, or when you see other things. What was that wonderful, remarkable, but hard-hitting show? I Will Destroy You. What was that on? It was on HBO, right? About the woman, who survives a sexual assault, and then as she looks for that night, try to recapture that night. I mean, that's just, as a young Black woman who wrote that show, things like that, or I guess input like that, has helped me as a writer to understand, these fuller dimensions. And I'm not to name drop, but I will just on Snowfall. We're writing it. We have a show about a Black gangster destroying South Central, willingly destroying it in the 80s and a white CIA officer supplying them drugs. And so we're very clear we're fooling with dynamite in a certain way, and that we have Black gangsters dropping Black bodies at times. So all that stuff is always at play in terms of like, what are we showing? What are we not showing? What is coming out of the mouths of our characters? What are their actions? But I say that to say, it's then giving me greater pause in terms of then when I bring those kind of elements to the page, for prose.
Mhm.
To some extent, you do have to tread lightly. I mean, as Shannon said, there's no rule book for this, but man, you have to sort of figure it as you go. And if that does mean I got to give it to somebody that says, man, you're way off on this, man. And this stuff is like from the 1950s. This is terrible stuff. You should do that, because then we can only be so critical of our own work, and so therefore I think you do have to subject it to at times that kind of scrutiny. To not to say you shouldn't tackle it, that is to say to create your villains the way you want to create your villains, but you gotta figure that out. You gotta, there is no particular way to go at it other than in the end, does it work or it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could jump in, well, first of all, Gary, I need to be in your writer's room with you writing that stuff, because that is essentially also what's going on in my book. And
yes.
Me being, I'm a Ghanaian American woman. My protagonist is an assassin, and she works for an organization made up of Africans who go out and, well, they don't go out, but they send her out to kill other Africans who are not like with their cause and things like that. And so, how do you make a protagonist who is also a woman go against the typical stereotypes that you see for an immigrant woman and things like that? And so those are the things that, I had to think about. And I had, a reader say, well, she's killing people, doesn't, and, her the organization is supposed to be for the betterment of, the African diaspora,
Right.
killing people. And how do you justify that? And I said, well, really, there's no justification for killing someone, right? But this is the belief that they had. And what I needed to do with my character is to not make her one-dimensional.
Yes.
And I think that's what makes it, that's what shows that you respect your characters, and that I think Maddie had written, do you think you can take a chance on writing experiences that are not, our own? Well, I've never been an assassin, so I'm definitely writing out of my experience.
Well, so you say. So you say.
So I
Yeah.
say, because then I have to come and kill you, Maddie. So I have to write, though, I respect my character, and I have to write her in a three-dimensional way. So she is not just a killer, period, right?
Right.
Even her antagonist is not just the killer. There are parts of him, he's a very, he's someone you're just definitely going to hate, but you will, you might find some things that are relatable, to him. And I go against, all the stereotypes. So yes, this big, huge African, tribal, group of people, they are, yes, Africans, but they are not Africans in the way that maybe everybody might stereotype them, right? They're not running around, naked with, and whatever, with huts and things like that. They are filthy rich people. And so I try to flip those stereotypes. And so when you are writing outside of your experiences, if you're going to write about an antagonist or whomever, a bad guy, a villain, who is not of your same culture and race, then you want to think about all those stereotypes that, people usually put on that group of people, and flip that around and not maybe make that antagonist that way. And that shows that you've respected your character, you've respected your readers who are going to be reading it. And I had a sensitivity reader, for my book. My publisher got that for me. And so the things that, my sensitivity reader kind of dinged me on wasn't necessarily race, but it was stuff about, women, how I portray, some women, or how one of the characters spoke to another woman in, something she called it slut shaming. So there are so many things, and we're talking about race and culture here, but there's so many different things that you have to kind of be mindful of how you portray things. And I absolutely didn't think, I was like, oh my gosh, that's not what she thinks of, this other character. She would never think that way of her. But in some just real minor thing that she said, that's how it would come across. And so I was so happy to have that, information and to work on that. And so the next time when I wrote book 2, I made sure that I didn't have those things in it. So as long as a, writer, I think, is very mindful and respectful, three-dimensional in how they, write their characters and the experiences that are not their own, I think the reader will give them a bit more grace. And the readers, can definitely tell when you are putting in things that are so, stereotypical and so just, of course they would say this thing. And they'll definitely get when you have really tried to make those characters people that are relatable and people who are totally 360.
Hey, Yasmin and Shannon, would you talk a little bit about what sensitivity readers do? Because I think that's kind of a new thing for certain writers.
Yeah, I can talk about that. I've been doing sensitivity reading for a few years. I started off only doing it about, for Black characters and mixed race characters, and I've kind of evolved to, like, in my current job, I work for Pearson as a sensitivity reader for the textbook company. And yeah, it's been around for a while. It is growing. So for the textbook company, we review different texts and we look for everything, but we read a lot of articles and we like peer talk to each other. But anyway, it's basically, you want to make sure that, when you're talking about people of different races, different nationalities, different genders, different socioeconomic backgrounds, that you're doing so in a way that honors them, that is accurate. Accuracy is key, and that's also not stereotyping. So one thing that I do for novels, and I recently did a sensitivity read for a crime novel for a major publisher, was So this was in that novel, and I've also seen it in other novels that I've done. One of the big things that white writers are struggling with is how to describe their Black characters, how to show their race, and then how is that character seeing other people. So for instance, this last one that I did, there was a Black woman and a mixed race woman, but you don't learn their race until like quite a bit down the line. So I told those writers, you know, don't be afraid. You know, you can tell their race early on, because, you know, race is, it's a construct, but it's part of our identity, and it's okay to say that, you know. So I think a lot of them were like tiptoeing, you know, and you know, you don't want to be like objectifying, but it's okay that it's part of someone's identity. And then in one of the novels that I did the sensitivity read for, it was the main character was a mixed race character. And for that, she had the character not say the races of the other characters. But then that creates difficulty, because then like halfway, 3/4 down the line, you would find out what race that character was. And again, it's not that it's a make or break situation and that you need to know someone, but if you're bringing it in later, and she said, oh, well, I was afraid that because this person doesn't want other people defining her by race, that she wouldn't want to define other people by race. But the thing is that you can't not see other races, and that's not a bad thing to not see other races, but someone who is mixed race is going to see every race, because that's just the way that we walk in society. It's like everyone's seeing our race, we also see other people's races. It's just the way that it is. So to not be afraid to have that character be like, oh, that person's Black, that person's Japanese, you know, it's okay. So I could talk about that for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah, and for me, it's very much the same. I mean, I was working on a sensitivity read, or sometimes we call it an authenticity read, a little earlier today. And so I also do fiction, and I've done educational field. Definitely when I'm looking in the educational field and looking at the resources, looking at the types of resources that they put in and the scenarios that they use to ensure that that has inclusivity, and that the resources that they use also have a broad range of types of contributors in there, and then the things that I'm also looking at, I really like, what Shannon was saying about talking about race. It's totally okay to talk about race within your books. What I would also add to that is, if you're going to talk about race, then you talk about it, or you mention it for all of your characters. You don't pick and choose who is going to be identified as, Black or whatever, and who is not, because typically the assumption is if you don't mention that person's race, then unless you already know from whatever that they are not, that they are a person of color, you're going to assume that they are not a person of color. And so I have read books in which every other, character that's a person of color, they are identified by their race, but then the white character is not. And so that would be the problem, right? So it's everybody or it's none. And that's what I would tell the reader. And then if I was to answer Nan's question about slut shaming, it's also okay if your person, because I have a person who's an assassin, and Gary has a character who also kills people, and they do bad things, and so they're going to do what they're going to do. You can have a character who's not a good person, and a person who speaks derogatively to other people. The question is, does that person always have to say things? Does that person have to say those words every single time? And that's something that I have asked a writer before, who was using some really horrible words and kept using those words.
Mhm.
And I'm like, and let's talk, let's say, the N word, right? We are readers and writers of today, not readers and writers of back in the day. So it is so easy to imply and infer that these words are being said without actually putting it on the page. And so that is something that I really try to hit with, with writers, with other writers, and I do it from myself. So with slut shaming or whatever, other than, like necessarily that N word, if it think about, does it really have to be said? And if it doesn't, then let me write in a way that I infer it. Trust me, the reader will know exactly what you're talking about without actually having to read it. And then with other words, you might say it one time, and so they know, oh, wow, this person says these things. And all those other times, there are ways, that's why we're writers, right? We create and we're creative. And so we come up with these creative ways to let the reader know that this person is a real nasty person and says these things, because we can write about how those other characters react to what was said rather than actually hearing those words.
I
see you nodding. I like that. Go ahead.
No, I agree. You're right, and it is a heck of a balance, right? I mean, if anything, I probably use too many MFs in my work, and even I like, oh my goodness, I should tone that down some.
I like an MF though. That's okay. Go ahead.
but you're right. I mean, but listen, it's a balancing act, and it's also the question of, for a lot of us, we might be writing a close third person. So, again, a lot of us from the perspective of our main character, right? And how they perceive the world, and how they are interpreting the world. And they might not always be, the best person to do that. But that's okay, as long as then the trick then is, how do I show that either through another character or some other reaction, so that you understand that there is, that there's more there than that, what you're necessarily getting, from that character.
I was at a panel kind of around this topic maybe a year or two ago. I don't know if it was VoucherCon or maybe it was another Sisters in Crimes. I don't know what it was, but the speaker said that it was offensive to describe characters' skin color in terms of food or drink. Can you talk about that? Because it's like, oh, the color of a latte or the chocolate, or, I mean, what about that?
I think that's one of those gray areas. Because I've talked about this, in my Black women writers group, and there's no firm consensus. But I do think that you might want to try other ways to describe the person, so that it's not limited to food. I would say that, sometimes we describe each other in that way. But I do think that it's good to stretch yourself, because, and anyone else, feel free to jump in as well.
That was a hard one, Shannon. I was going to let you. But I'll tell you, me personally, because sometimes if it gets a little bit much, a caramel mocha latte, I definitely don't know what that even look like. So I will, I'll just go. I mean, you could easily look up, color palettes, and that's what. And so I have that as one of my writing resources for me personally, so that I can, instead of saying that, I might say this person is mahogany or cedar brown or something like that. And so there are ways to go around it, and you kind of stretch the reader too, because they're like, oh, what does that look like? And they might look that up, and you've taught them something. So sometimes, people don't want to be referred to as food unless that's, personal thing between them and their boo or whatever. But definitely it is something just like what Shannon said. It's a gray area. And so for some, it doesn't work for all. I would say don't use too much of it, and then you should be okay.
There you go. Wise words.
So as you were talking, I was thinking about authors like William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor, who were writing of their time, right? And are being criticized now for perhaps the content or how they describe characters. And of course, hopefully writers would not write like that now, but what do we do about writing from before, when it was, that's how people were writing, they're writing of their time? Do we take down those writers of those times? Do we, what do we make of that?
I mean, listen, it's right. It's writing of their time, and you can either defend it nor praise it, I suppose. I mean, in that regard, right? That's funny. You should ask that, because I've just been doing a piece about Edgar Allan Poe, and Poe, had some racist ass descriptions in what few Black characters show up in his work, and he had some racist ass descriptions and very stereotypical, et cetera, and yet he is the godfather of the modern mystery novel. So both those things exist at the same time, right? That's really the point, I guess, right? That we can hold in our head, necessarily, you can laud them for certain things and then obviously then ding them for other things, but I wouldn't, me personally, I wouldn't cancel them. I would, you would teach that, I taught at Antioch for a while, I would teach that material, but we would have a discussion about that material, right? What is it that we're getting at? Why does this work, or why does this not work? Even in the context of their work, right? Even in the context of their work in their time period, right? Which is not necessarily the case that all writers, even all white writers at that point, wrote like that. So I mean, all these things are fair game in that sense, but I think I'm not about to say take their books off the shelf, you know what I mean, or ban their books. No.
I completely agree. I think the problem is when you're not allowed to say, oh, this person was writing in a way that today would be offensive. And I kind of find it discomforting now, we have to be able to say that we find certain things upsetting.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yes.
At the same time, that doesn't mean that, exactly, that they should be taken from the shelves. Exactly. Like, I had some problems in grad school. I went to a very white grad school, and I was, the only Black person in the classroom. And some of the people we were reading were I was on the East Coast, and they were New England writers such as Harriet Beecher Stowe. And I wasn't allowed to criticize Harriet Beecher Stowe. And I found that very problematic. It's not that I thought that she shouldn't be taught in the classroom. It's not that I thought that her book wasn't, seminal for its time, but to not be able to say, hey, I have some problems with the way that she portrayed things.
Absolutely.
Like I felt like that was harmful to me.
Yeah.
A question that came in along these lines is, what about writing historical novels? Are we allowed to use the terms of the times? Otherwise, it can sound too PC, taking the reader out of the work. What do you think about that? Historical novels?
Well, I actually brought that up a little while ago. And I said that, so a historical novel can still be historical without actually using those terms now, because we are not in those times. We are in today. And so therefore, you can write around those words, and the reader knows what time period that is, and they absolutely will know what it is that the person has called that other person without actually having to see it on the page. Because just kind of think about like the things that offend you, right? If you see something, if you hear something and you're just like, it makes you clutch your pearls. See, I'm in South Carolina, so we got to clutch pearls here, and I don't have any on right now. But like, if you think about that, then think about your reader and how they would feel to see those things. Those things are harmful, and they do hurt. And even if you're a reader and you know that this is a historical novel, you're here to read this book to like enjoy it right now. And when we see those words on the page, it takes us out of that moment of enjoyment. It reminds us of this harshness and this thing, and it removes the pleasure that you're trying to give the reader. I mean, it's not like you're a textbook and you're trying to teach them something. Well, not in that way, you know what I mean? So I say, just kind of think about how you would feel if you saw these things all the time, the things that really, really trigger you, and you see that repeatedly on the page, even if, you know, it's hidden under the context of it's a historical fiction. If it doesn't have to be that way, then I would say don't use it. It's always ask yourself, why am I putting this in there? Is this really, really necessary, you know, for me to put that in there? And there was another question earlier that we had missed about, and I guess this would be for like Shannon and I, and whoever else, do we ever feel any pressure about offering an opinion that represents a huge swath of individuals and things? And I would say for me, I don't feel pressure, because I do let my client know that, you know, this is just one person's opinion. This is just Yasmin's opinion, right? And this is what I think. And so you're paying me to be very, very critical about every little thing, and I'm going to nitpick every little thing. But ultimately, it is up to the author to decide whether they are going to keep or take those things out. And so sensitivity reading, I definitely want people to know that it is not a no, you can't do this. It is a should you do this? I don't think so, but maybe you might still want to. So I'm just letting you know that you might not want to, but if you go ahead, just know that someone had, you know, had tried to like give you a little bit of pause. But I'm in no way am I saying don't you use this, you can't use this because it's your book.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's the same for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that being said, like, sorry, that being said, I do like to participate in scholarship and see what other people are saying. And because I do know that my words carry an impact, so I want to always be learning. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, I'll just chime in and say that, you know, I did a novel a couple of years ago set in the set in the late 20s, and where I reimagined, it's kind of a pulp novel where I reimagined Matthew Henson as this kind of pulp figure. And because it is set then, right, there are certain words that get used, but I would agree that, right, sort of to Yasmin, both points, but really to Yasmin's point, listen, there could be times when I overused it because of whites reacting to this capable black man. But I had a good editor, and I think we worked and wrestled with that, because you're right. In the end, it's the book you want to write, but you want to also reflect a certain reality of a certain time period. And again, the book is from his perspective. The character, you know, it's third person, but it's really close third, which is generally how I write, I guess. And so then, yeah, and so you have to sort of walk that line, right?
So you might have already answered this, but this is another question. When setting a piece set in the past, how does a writer address troubling social norms of that period? Should they be explained or called out? And she says, my piece is set in the Jim Crow South. So, you know.
I'll just say real quick, just to follow up, I would say, depending on who the character is, or maybe you're shifting points of view, that's how you get at it, right? As I said, with the Matthew Henson book, it was easy to the extent that you're in Henson's head, so you understand, you know, when this cracker says something, well, you know, Henson don't take it. I mean, take it. You know, sometimes he hits a guy, but you know what I mean. But the idea that you have some perspective on it because you have a filter through which you're interpreting these words. So I guess that's the point, right? That the whose point of view am I telling this part of the story? And it could be shifting points of view, which that might be great, but you still got to figure that out.
For the question that Lucy is asking about if you're using the term Negro, I would say if a character is describing another character, that's one thing. You know, if you're writing a historical novel and a white character refers to a black character as a Negro, like I would say that's historically accurate. If you are, you know, you the author as a 21st century American are describing the character as Negro, then I think that's something that doesn't need to be done.
Well, it could be two black people talking to each other.
Yeah, or two black people talking to each other. Exactly. Yeah.
It could be anybody in my family.
Yeah. Yeah. But I would say, like, if you're saying, you know, if you as a 21st century author are talking about different characters in your book, like, you wouldn't have to characterize a black person as a Negro because, you know, we know that you are of this time period.
Mhm. I want to remind everybody, post some questions in the chat. We have 20 more minutes and welcome your questions. Anything that you've been wondering about, it's a perfect time to ask those questions. I have another question for Yasmin and Shannon, and that is, as sensitivity readers, are there certain mistakes you see writers making over and over again? Is there like a few common mistakes or a few common glitches in the writing that you find?
No, I mean, the only consistent thing that I found is writers being afraid to describe someone's race. Other than that, it's certain types of descriptions. And I wouldn't even say that they're the same descriptions, but just descriptions in general. Like, for instance, you know, trying to describe the way a Black person looks and then saying that their knuckles were darker than the rest of their hands. Like, that's something that you don't want to say. But even that, I wouldn't say I've had more than one author say that. So it's just being aware of the way you're describing people.
Sure.
I think definitely that, because that definitely falls into like stereotypes and what people perceive, you know, other races, you know, that's how they identify them and stuff like that. And so that is something that, you know, I think I've called a couple of people on, like, maybe how they would describe the nose and the lips, right? Because I'm like, well, you know, there's more to us than that, and so therefore, you know, just do that. Another would be, you know, what I had mentioned before about not giving the racial identification for white people as they did with all the other people of color. Definitely hitting on some stereotypes, like making your people of color, maybe your Black and brown people, loud and abrasive, because that is another stereotype that people attribute to that, or aggressive and things like that. And so it's really working to go against those kinds of stereotypes, because you don't want to play into that. And it's easy to play into that. Even for me, I have to go back and be like, wait a minute, as a Black person, I don't want to perpetuate those stereotypes either, because I want people to see all other races, all other marginalized groups of people as a whole 360, not as an other, but just like them. And I want them to be as relatable to the reader, no matter what kind of, you know, no matter where you come from, you should find some sort of relatability. And so it's really going up against those stereotypes, and then also making sure that the author doesn't have any like preconceived notions and any like biases that even they might not overtly know, but sometimes it kind of seeps into the writing if they are writing a certain character and I'm noticing that the character is a certain way the whole way through, things like that. I'll be like, you know, you might want to, you know, check and see if you feel this kind of way, because this is how it comes across to the reader.
So these questions are, thank you everybody for posting some questions. What are the biggest issues you find when reading contemporary fiction? And can you give examples of authors who successfully write characters outside of their culture?
I think the most successful thing is just writing the person as a multifaceted person, and that their entire identity isn't about their race. Like it's part of their identity, but there's way more to the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, S.J. Roseanne came to mind, right, because of her, books with the Asian American character and writing about the Asian American community, or at least the Asian American community, particularly I guess the Chinese American community in New York. As far as I can tell, seems pretty, as they say, spot on. Right, absolutely, as Shannon said, it's always about, we're all human beings, so it's any character. You imbue any character with human characteristics, good or bad, then that's part of the job. That's just part of the way to portray the human being.
What about identifying characters by their names?
Sure, for sure.
Yeah. And not, I mean, I guess that.
I mean, what does that mean? Not by race, just by their names?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean like using like ethnic names?
Yeah.
Whether they should use that or not?
Right.
Is that what you're asking?
Right.
So that's a good question too, because while it is nice to have ethnic names, there are people of color who have regular schmegular names like everyone else. And so I wouldn't want to just, that would also kind of feed into a stereotype where if you have all of your people of color have ethnic names, but your white characters is Jan and Fran, that's pretty obvious, and that would classify them as other, and then that would become problematic, and so there are people of color who are called Jan and Fran as well. So I don't know, like the name is I'm not 100% sure about that one, because I love our ethnic names. Mine is not one that is, I mean, it's it's Yasmin, you know what I'm saying? And so I love to see a Yasmin, but I that's a hard one. Shannon, Gary, what do y'all think?
I think it can be one of the methods, one of many methods. Like don't never do it, but don't do it all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen, I got a white bread name. You know what I mean? I mean, so what am I, and I know people who have ethnic last names, but you know what I mean? They're not that ethnicity, right? So I mean, I mean, I guess that's to say is that you could fool with that as well. I mean, you could have fun with it. I mean, there's a book, actually the character shows up a couple of times. I have a character named O'Connor, and that's the only thing you know about. He's a professional thief. And I've yet to, I have specifically never told the reader. I've told physically what he looks like and this and that, age range, what have you. But I have never told, and I've told all around him who people are, race, ethnic, gender, whatever. But I've never revealed his race, right? And of course, now you would assume with that name that he's white, but maybe he is, maybe he's not. Black people have Irish last names, so there you go.
Okay, here's one. Sometimes when I write in close third, I struggle with writing only what my main character knows. To my character, the person she met looks Japanese, but she doesn't know that she is Japanese. So how do I describe her race? I describe the race of everyone so that it's not white by default.
Oh, that made Shannon leave.
Did Shannon go away?
No, I'm in a very tight apartment complex, and there's somebody crying. So I'm just,
oh no,
just yeah.
Oh no,
it happens sometimes. There's a couple that fights a lot.
Oh my gosh!
I just turned on the fan just so it's not part of our talk.
Oh,
yeah.
Real life.
Yeah.
That question is gosh,
I think we need more information. Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go on to the next one, and maybe there'll be more detail below. What's the state of the state about writing Native American characters?
The state of it.
You mean whether you can or can't?
Nan, maybe you could put a little bit more detail in there too. and we'll go on to the next one.
Yeah, and in what context, right? And again, are we writing them in the
Right.
past? Are we writing them now? Are we,
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rule
Yeah,
saying you can't write Native American characters.
right.
Just, have a sensitivity reader who's Native American.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah.
Because you should, right? As people have said, I mean, you got to be authoritative here. You can't just be right. I mean, you could just. I mean, I was going to say you could watch if you just watch Reservation Dogs, which is by the way, is a great show. I mean, you shouldn't just watch that and say I can go write Native American characters, but you might want to start there and then think about what else could I do to understand something about what's going on. Modern time.
But if I can add just the disclaimer that the writers of that show are of that, or of that culture, so they can get away with saying things, doing things.
That's right.
That we cannot. So don't
That's
do
right.
it. You know what I mean? So you
That's right.
definitely need.
That's right.
Watch that because it is a great show, but then also make sure that you have someone of that experience in that culture to kind of look through and make sure that you're not perpetuating. You just don't want to perpetuate people. Don't perpetuate.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it comes back to having, if you're at all unsure about something, I mean, sensitivity readers seem to be the way to go in my book.
And I will say, I don't want people to be afraid of writing characters that are not of their race. For example, as a mixed race person, I wanted a book about a mixed race person where the book was not about being mixed race, because it happens all the time for white characters. And in my sensitivity reading, a white person did it in a way that I had some feedback for them, but overall I feel like they did a great job, and I'm not a fiction writer, so it's not something that I could have done myself, and I really appreciated reading it.
There you go.
So you may need more context for this one too, but my protagonist is of mixed race, Jamaican, Black, Chinese, setting is Washington, D.C. Any words of wisdom on dealing with mixed races?
Where is that again? Jamaican, Black, Chinese. Any words of dealing with first makes it. Read, just read some books, articles by and about mixed race people. And as we've been saying, look for a sensitivity reader. And as I was saying, like, don't feel like you can't do it,
Right.
That's
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But definitely for something, very somewhat specific like that, yes, you would definitely want to have some inroad, I guess is the word I would say, into that community, right? Because there is a community of folks who are those folks, and you want to listen to me, man. Like I said, the best thing is to just hang out and talk to people and get to know people and patterns of speech patterns, all little slang, all that stuff that really helps to make a character come alive, whoever they are.
Right. So you're writing a three-dimensional character.
Yeah.
Right. But somehow, but also understanding that, as we've said, that you want a character that does reflect. If you're going to have a character with those kind of roots, then you want a character that in some ways does reflect those roots some kind of way.
Right.
Because it invariably will filter through, who they are.
And then you also want to maybe ask yourself, because you might be asked this, why do you have a character of that?
That's right.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. For that. So there should be, not that the book should be about, their race, but there should be, a reason for you as to why you want to have that, and make sure it doesn't come across as what Shannon said toward the beginning about fetishizing, certain races and things like that. You just don't want that to come across in writing. What I'm saying. I'm not saying that you are, but you would be asked that question because the readers will definitely ask.
And for example, that book that I liked, it was a young adult novel, and the reason that the author had the character be mixed race is because it was a high school student, and she was a blues, I forget what instrument she played, but she played an instrument and she did blues music. And so she had you know, her white side of the family and her Black side of the family, and she was influenced by her Black grandfather who loved the blues. And so she had a specific reason for that racial identity.
Mhm. Mm.
You gonna tell me that title off
Oh,
this-
yeah, I will. Yeah.
So I don't know if you can address this one. Are publishers today not comfortable taking certain historical subjects? I don't know.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know, but yeah.
Okay, how about this? If a writer gets harsh public blowback based on you, the author, don't have a right to write others, even if it's done well, what's the best path forward? To respond, to ignore?
I think it depends on the blowback. If a lot of people are saying it, you know, you might want to you know, take that in. If it's one person, I mean, you can never make everybody happy. If it's one person saying something, it might be one person's opinion.
But yeah, are they like talking about like the blowback on, what was it, American Dirt? Is that right? Yeah,
That
which,
was one. That was
right.
one.
Yeah.
yeah.
If it's something like that where a lot of people are saying something, I will say that I had an essay go viral a few years ago, and it was about being mixed race during police brutality. And it went viral because people either loved it or hated it. A lot of mixed race people identified with it. A lot of Black people either loved it or hated it. And I will say that while it was the essay for me to write at the time, and it felt true at the time, there were certain things that made sense, you know, that I was getting criticized for. Because, you know, I do have some white privilege because I'm half white. So, you know, just take things in. If a lot of people are telling you something, you might want to, you know, take that in.
And I think as writers, we do need to grow a thick skin too, right? And for so many reasons, so many reasons. So how and where do you find the right sensitivity reader for your book?
Well, so there are some organizations and like some people post it like on Twitter, and they'll say, you know, hey, does anyone know of a sensitivity reader for this kind of thing? And then I work with a group called Tessera Editorial, and we are a group of BIPOC editors, and so we don't do just sensitivity reading. We do all, you know, other kinds of editing as well. But there's that, and then there's another. I think it's called Salt and Sage, but I'm not too sure, you know, about that. So there are several that are like, you know, popping up now, and so it's all you have to do is like a search, and you should be able to find some. There's a big database. I think is it called like Editors of Color, something like that. And yeah, and so you could post your job on there, and then someone can like contact you if they're a fit, stuff like that. So it's just about, you know, doing the search. It's out there.
Yeah,
So
I got some of my work.
Your website in there. It'd be great to have it in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
So people could contact you through your website.
I got some of my work through the Editorial Freelancers Association. They had a category in there for sensitivity reading. So like an outsider could look at people's profiles and select what type of editing they needed. And sensitivity reading was one of them.
I guess in closing, because we're almost at 5 o'clock, do you have any advice for aspiring writers who are wanting to write about cultures not their own, apart from what we've already talked about?
Oh, I'll just say, I think as folks have said, look, you have to go in there with your eyes wide open, but you can't, well, yes, you can't worry that you might offend somebody. Well, okay, but you gotta, you know what I mean? You gotta still put the stuff on paper, and you still gotta wrestle with it. So you can't be you can't overthink it. I guess that's the thing, right? You don't want to overthink it. I mean, you want to think about it enough, but you don't want to overthink it. You want to put it down. And as people have said, I mean, you can then reach out to a sensitivity reader, but you have to do it. You're the writer. If you want to do it, and you think you have a reason for why I'm going to do, I'm going to have my black character show up on the res, and if I'm gonna do that, and I'm kind of intrigued by that idea, right? Then I better damn sure figure out what I'm doing. Even if I'm telling you the story, I'm gonna tell you the story from that character's point of view, but that's okay. But I still better know what I'm doing, right? So I gotta be reading, I gotta be talking to people, I gotta be interviewing people. I gotta do all the stuff that I gotta do, just like you research for a historical novel. I got to do that research. I got a human research, right, to make that step. And I'll still falter, no doubt about it, right? I'll still falter, but like Barbara said, you got to sometimes you got to have a thick skin about it. That doesn't mean you got to be a thick head about it. You got to listen, but you got to, it comes with the territory, man. That's the job we're in,
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you said exactly like that's what I was going to say. Write what it is that you want to write, but just be prepared when someone says, hey, this might be a problem. You make your decision, and then also be prepared for what may or may not come from that decision that you made. And just as long as you're ready to, double down or explain your intention or whatever, then, write what you're going to write.
I agree.
So much. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think this has been really useful and enlightening for everyone, and I appreciate it. I know everybody else appreciates it too. Thank you.